I had all of the presentations of modern infirmity. I was much, much heavier. I had brain fog and chronic fatigue. I was just a chronic insomniac. I was fidgety. I couldn't concentrate. Felt the need to check my phone all the time. All of those qualities that we basically accept as normal, but they're totally abnormal. That propelled me on this search to really try to understand the nature of chronic disease and why it is so widespread. We're so accustomed to downward spirals in health, but what I experience is an upward spiral, and those are possible too. In this moment in time, when essentially the world is out to trigger you, to be able to be untriggerable and to emotionally regulate is perhaps like the greatest skill that you can develop.
How did that impact your still real life stress?
I could apply that same ability to other stressful situations as they would inevitably arise. My children at work, in conflict, take a step back. What is the provenance of their action or their behavior? And what is the most appropriate response?
Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to be sitting down with someone who has spent his career creating spaces, both physical and digital, that foster growth, connection, and well-being. You might know Jeff Krasno as the co-founder of Wanderlust, the global yoga and wellness community, or from his work with Commune, where he's bringing wisdom from some of the world's leading minds on health, mindfulness, and personal development right to the people who need it most. But today we're going to be flipping the script. Jeff is used to amplifying other people's voices, so we're turning the spotlight on him. We'll talk about his new book, Good Stress, and how he went from running wellness events to realizing that his own health was in crisis. We get into the reality of modern stress and why we've engineered our lives for comfort, but are suffering as a result, and how introducing the right kinds of challenge can actually make us more resilient, more present, and ultimately healthier. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by stress, I know I have, struggled with making real life changes in your lifestyle, or wondered if discomfort might actually be the key to a better life, this episode is for you. Jeff shares some of the biggest lessons of his own journey, as well as simple practical strategies you can start applying today, right now, to improve your health, mindset, and energy. Welcome to the show. Jeff Krasno, welcome to my house.
Oh, thank you for having me. It reminds me a lot of my house.
The craziness is in your house too?
Yeah, the estrogen footprint of it all.
Yes. So you have 3 daughters, and we have 3 daughters. 2 right now, who one's sort of coming and going, who you spend time with. Mm-hmm. The youngest is finishing up high school. And you have 2, one sort of coming and going. Your oldest is out, and your youngest is still in school.
Yeah. So I might experience a brief period of empty nestum next year. Yeah. Because my eldest will be a senior in college, my middle one will be a freshman in college, and my sophomore in high school is doing a SYA, school year abroad.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a version of it. That's a good tune-up.
It's a tune-up.
I think it's a good practice.
It's a tune-up. That's exactly what it is.
So, Jeff, I was thinking about you coming here, and I think, like everyone who knows you, has a really soft spot in my heart for you, for not only who you are as a person, but, I was thinking we're going to talk about you today in your book, Good Stress, and some of your thoughts and feelings, but you spend a lot of time showcasing other people and talking about the good work they're doing. And you created, for a lot of people who know you, through Commune and your own podcast. And so I'm excited to really talk to you about you.
Well, thank you for that. I do actually get a lot of gratification from amplifying the work of others. And it's actually part of my latest endeavor and work. It's sort of as I did this kind of biopsychosocial intake form of myself. And I realized that for most of my adult life, I was sort of living this story that I told myself about myself, that I was sort of this chubby kid that had a very, very peripatetic upbringing, that was always sort of wiggling his way into new social cliques, often in new countries and new languages, and would essentially do anything to fit in, compromise any authentic component of myself to feel a sense of belonging. And that was, I had this awakening in some ways to that shortcoming, I would say, as a child, and then realized that I sort of transmuted in some way sort of my biggest weakness into one of my biggest superpowers, where because I recognized how important belonging is, that the thread of my professional life was essentially creating belonging. So for many years, I ran a company called Wanderlust, which was essentially the world's biggest yoga retreat, if you will. And yeah, it was fun to program all these luminaries and brilliant mystics and sages and yogis and et cetera. But really the most potent aspect of it was the community component of it, was sort of people celebrating each other. And I sort of unwittingly created that again within the context of commune. And and then by extension, I benefited from that because I got to meet all these brilliant people like yourself and so many of our colleagues that bent the arc of my kind of personal life, my health life. So I do really enjoy profiling other people, and I've sort of reluctantly stepped into, advocating for my own work.
Yeah. I think I can relate to that because, believe it or not, even though obviously I have a really different background, being in front, I've even had fun sometimes just being, like if I could tuck behind Laird and put Laird out in front, I've sort of had that feeling a lot of times where you feel like, okay, if I push myself forward, and I know people experience this in their own life, like maybe they have an idea at work and they feel like they're passionate about the idea, but it's like, hey, will someone accept this idea or accept me in this way? Pushing yourself forward sometimes can feel, especially if you're sensitive, not disingenuine, but it's like, how do you do it and still be your genuine self? But you're sort of saying, hey, everybody, I want you to listen to me just for a second. Yeah,
it's tricky. And candidly, I often find myself assuming other personalities along that journey. Like we just hung out with that dude, Rangan Chatterjee.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Dr. Chatterjee. Yeah. He's wonderful.
And since then, I've basically been speaking in an English accent.
You're right.
And because that guy, first of all, it's a pity that I'm not English because English people just sound so smart. I mean, that dude... He could just read the phone book on my podcast. Yeah. I'd be totally happy with it. Yeah. But, sometimes you begin to, at least I do, I also listen to a tremendous amount of Alan Watts and Christopher Hitchens and stuff like that. So I actually have asked the question, is there truly an authentic self? Or are we just in flux, changing moment to moment? And you just sort of have to lean into that and just be the person that you are here and now. And so I actually enjoy that, essentially morphing a little bit into situations. But yeah, I mean, Chip Conley, who I'm sure you've probably crossed paths with over time, he kind of elucidates this kind of distinguishing aspect between being the sage on the stage and the guide on the side. And they're both gratifying. There's a lot to both of them.
I wonder, because I go through this myself, I've really tried to make it a habit not to look left and right, but just to merely appreciate the way everybody does it, but try really hard to keep checking in with myself with how do you want to do it. And in this world that we live in, believe it or not, you and I are more similar. We're more quiet.
Yeah.
So do you ever, I'm just curious if you ever have times where you go, I just did this podcast with somebody and my podcast should blow doors. This was a good conversation. Or, it's like, do you ever wrestle with, am I supposed to do something different to promote this message that I so believe in?
Well, sure. And I won't say I'm like beyond the frustration of kind of what I see and witness sometimes on social media that is algorithmically preferenced for sensationalism and hyperbole and anything that's extreme. And there are people who I actually quite respect and like, but that are essentially so adept at tickling human negativity bias. You know, they're essentially creating anger and outrage on social media and other platforms. And of course, this is how ad revenue driven media is designed. It's designed for that. And, you know, those of us who tend to, embrace the middle way, I guess, a little bit more, and enjoy rigor and nuance and conversation that centers around kind of a search for truth. It can be very lonely, the middle way. And so, we have to find, I think, other ways to stay the course. And sometimes that's through humor or through kind of really trying to touch people emotionally. Those both have currency, I suppose, in the attention economy. But more, it's funny. Yeah, I think I am by default an introvert. I enjoy time alone. I love to write. I love to read. But I think part of actually becoming a better human is finding kind of this social homeostasis, if you will, between being an introvert and being an extrovert. I call that being an ambivert, where you can kind of toggle between the two. Yeah. And I'm always amazed. They always say, like, Bill Clinton, for example, right? He actually accrued more energy by being around more people all the time. Like, he never needed that time to cocoon out and re-energize. I do.
Right. Like, but you were also using someone as an example who's more of a performer, I think, versus you're really trying to put it together and say, well, what does that mean? And what would that look like if I did that practice? So I also think I always go back to when I go to bed at night, that whole idea of being true to myself and genuine to wherever I am that day, that's going to have to be good enough. This podcast has been brought to you by Maui Nui venison. So I received it as a present probably 4 or 5 years ago. It showed up at our house. I love that part of it. And it was a thank you gift. And I did some more research and we became customers. We're part of the Ohana. And let's just talk about, first of all, how responsible this meat is. I know in my house, I am trying to find that high quality meat, but it's also something that you want to feel good about and that you share with your friends and family. And it is the only stress-free, 100% wild harvested meat that's on the market. And I love the fact that they are preserving delicate native ecology on Maui. So there's this great kind of cooperation going on. And now let's talk about the nutrient density. Some studies have shown that it is 53% more nutrient dense than other red meat. And what that translates for me and the way that I use it is that I eat a lot less of it. It's almost like your body knows, like, hey, I'm good. I've had the good stuff. I don't need any more. And it's delicious. You don't change how you make the meat. I know sometimes you get wild meat and you think, oh, it's kind of gamey. No one will ever know. You can use it the same way that you cook the meat that you're already getting. It's very easy. They mail it to you. It tastes great. We've even been adding a little extra where Laird will get the liver and heart meat and grind it up and then put it in our other ground meat. So we've been making patties out of that, getting that extra nutrition. And I really do appreciate this brand. It's trusted by a lot of people. So if you're curious, they have a great offer for you. All you have to do is go to MauiNuiVenison.com/Gabby, and they will give you 15% off your order. That's MauiNuiVenison.com/Gabby. MauiNuiVenison.com/Gabby, Gabby. You'll get 15% off your entire order.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I'm not going to try to be better, but it's that stay to the course kind of mentality, which is even harder to do today. So I really appreciate that about you.
Thanks.
So we can have a really quiet conversation today.
Hopefully, the lugubriousness doesn't sort of put people to sleep.
It won't. So let's talk about good stress. So you've written you wrote Wanderlust, and I'm so interested in somebody who, in a certain way, you could do a million different things. Taking on a project like Commune, even though I know it's rewarding, this is a challenging business. I mean, it's another business, and to write another book. So why did you feel compelled What about this message in Good Stress is so important to you that you were willing to put yourself out there?
Yeah, well, initially I was propelled by curiosity and then subsequently by necessity. So in founding Commune, I was very, very committed to this notion of sort of amplifying these ideas around well-being, modalities and practices that I think are just central to bending the arc of people's health and also bringing it to the people that often need it the most but get it the least. Because wellness and the wellness industry can be often sort of cubbyholed for the affluent and the effete, of which I squarely am in. And I really was committed to this idea of creating of democratizing it. So that was sort of the original mission and motivation. And then I started interviewing hundreds and hundreds of doctors and health experts and just interesting people, and mostly driven by curiosity. And about 4 years ago, I found myself kind of unfortunately in a very, very compromised physiological state. So, and we've talked about this a little kind of offline, but I was much, much heavier. So I was around 207 to 210 pounds. But more than that, I had all of the kind of anodyne presentations of modern infirmity, if you will. I had, brain fog and chronic fatigue and lower back problems. I kept pulling my calf. I was just a chronic insomniac. I was fidgety. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't read a book. Felt the need to check my phone all the time. Easily agitated and annoyed by my children. All of those qualities that we basically accept as normal, but they're totally abnormal, really. And, there were also other, I would say, insults to my vanity, just not really loving the way that I looked. I had sort of dad bod, inner tube around the waist. Started growing these relatively ghastly, like brown skin tags in my armpits. Some people get them on the back of their neck and stuff, which I learned later is a indication of diabetes and insulin resistance. I had the gynecomastia,
boobs.
Man boobs. And which my girls never failed to remind me of, generally sometimes, and not A cups necessarily, Dad. So there was that too.
Nothing like your daughters to really just hit the buttons. They know.
Yeah, stop leaving a bra on my bed. They didn't do that, but
you have a very powerful wife.
Yes,
you have a mighty might.
Oh, yes. I live in her shadow mostly, or I kind of think that I carry her torch. Let's just say.
Yeah, that's a great thing. But she's a strong, fit, and very direct person. Was there ever a time that how long have you been together?
37 years now. Well, depends who you ask. I've been with her for 37. She's been with me for 36. This is a debate that we've had over.
There was a few month period that
Cabernet.
You haven't settled.
Yeah.
Was there ever a time that Skylar was like, "Hey, honey, you might want to," or was it the doctor? Was it when you went to the doctor and they go, "Hey, you're going to have diabetes and all these other things, and maybe go on medication"? Was there ever a time that she was like,
Yeah, like I say, our children will never listen to us, but they never fail to imitate us. That's kind of my going line about children. In this respect, I sort of saw Skylar as my mom. She's like, now, Jeff, stop eating the peanut butter. Stop scooping it out and eating it raw at 9 p.m. at night. So, yeah, she's always been extremely fit. She's a yoga teacher, and most of the time we just chalked this kind of disparity between her bodily form, which was candidly more masculine, and my bodily form, which is candidly more feminine at that juncture. We just sort of chalked it up to genetic determinism. Like, this was just written in the stars that we were meant to be this way. So I was like not so keen to listen to her. But yeah, I mean, my kind of bucket of ice water over my head, which at that juncture was not something I was choosing to do. Unlike now I actually do that by choice, strangely, was I put this little disc on my triceps. And for those just listening to audio format, that is a continuous glucose monitor, which is a sort of little disc that sits in your triceps. It can be quite harrowing to put it on at first because it has a little needle that punctures, and I'm a trypnophobe. So the first time was like required quite a bit of deep belly breathing, but it doesn't hurt at all. You can just snap it into place, and it dutifully bounces its data to an app on your phone. And I stared into that dashboard of glucose. And lo and behold, my fasting blood glucose was 125 milligrams per deciliter, which is, for those who don't really keep track of that thing, is on the very, very highest end of prediabetes and sort of lowest cusp of diabetes. And then subsequently, I went to my family doctor, my PCP. Generally, I love to cancel my PCP appointments. I was one of those dudes, right? Men tend to do that because we have so many busy things to do, right? But then I went, and sure enough, I got a hemoglobin A1C test, and that also proved out that I was kind of on the lower end of the diabetes range. And that propelled me on this search to really try to understand the nature of chronic disease and why it is so widespread. I mean, everything that I've just recounted is not in the least bit extraordinary. It's like so ordinary.
But then, okay, so how do you think you got there? Because as somebody who knows, I put that in quotes, because this is my universal question always is like, we have all this information out there more than ever. There's a gazillion podcasts. There's a million books. And yet we're always talking about it. And you, as somebody who you were in this space, how do you think you got there?
Yeah, well, candidly, wanderlust for me, so for people who weren't familiar with that business, it was a fairly large concern. I mean, I raised
it was a big deal.
A ton of private equity capital. I had, sort of cigar smoking plutocrats sitting in some panopticon in Midtown scrutinizing me, putting a tremendous amount of pressure. I was growing the business like crazy. In 2016, we had 68 events, large scale events that year in 20 countries. So what did that mean for my life?
Yeah.
And of course, this is very male, I would say. It's not exclusively male, but, I used to go to Skylar's yoga retreats, like in the middle of the Costa Rican, rainforest, right? And there I'd be. It was like 28 millennial women, 2 gay guys, and Jeff, waking with the sun and meditating and surfing and doing yoga and really like living our most vibrant lives. And I was enchanted by that whole experience. And I was like, had a very masculine idea, like, how do I scale this? And I did, and that was kind of the provenance of wanderlust. And I came out and just, built this thing that was providing a lot of wellness for everyone else except me. So this is where I sort of joke that my foray into health and wellness turned into wealth and hellness for me. And that's true for, I think, a lot of people, no matter what their industry. I mean, I was living basically from coffee to wine o'clock. I was committing daily carbicide, like eating the bagels and the muffins and all that stuff. I was on an airplane all the time. My circadian rhythm was completely upside down, so I wasn't sleeping at all. Just all of the foundations of my health were off. Stress levels off the chart. Email, Slacks, texts. I don't think they had Slack at that point, but all of the things coming in at me, and I essentially was just a product of modernity. And I was sitting at a desk, sedentary. I was sitting in temperature-controlled environments all of the time. I was looking for ease and convenience at every turn to make my life better, to essentially assuage all the discomforts that I was having in my life. And that's just the way we live. I mean, in the last 70 years, particularly accelerating during that time, but since the Industrial Revolution, essentially culture, often in the name of profit, has been engineered for ease and convenience. And what I realized in my life is that ease was causing a lot of dis-ease, and that convenience was contributing to a lot of inconvenient truths about myself. And I was hardly alone.
I think you're hardly alone is right, because I think we look at people become young adults and then it's like, I got to do something. I got to make something of my life. I have to build that. That takes time and energy, especially if you're an entrepreneur, but also if you work for somebody, there's an expectation. So, what I hear that is like, it feels like that's just our biology trying to equalize somehow, because we're set up for all of it, right? We're set up for short bursts of, as you say, good stress. But we're not ever meant to be sitting at our desk for 7 hours navigating, 47 emails that have to be dealt with that day. So it makes sense that we sort of try to go the other way to offset this weird artificial stress that we have from our devices, from the way we work, how expansive. We used to live in a much simpler, smaller way. So here we are. So you're still dealing with all the things. You have a family. You have this business and businesses and these projects. So you see the doctor. He says, "Hey, you're headed for some trouble." She said, "You're headed for some trouble." Did you go, okay, right then and there, I'm gonna have a plan in action? Or what was the thinking? How did you reevaluate and then start to make the changes?
Yeah, well, I was in a very fortunate situation such that, Mark Hyman was in my sauna and Wim Hof was in my cold plunge. And I don't mean that to flex, it's just that's true.
Yeah.
And Skylar and I created this little strange laboratory oasis up in Topanga, not far from here in the Santa Monica Mountains. And this was a place that hosted all of these wonderful doctors and health experts. And so really through distilling a lot of the information that I was getting from them and engaging in plenty of me search and jumping into kind of the petri dish of my own N of one, I started to stack the protocols of inconvenience, essentially, which, I later codified as good stress. But I started to push the edges of discomfort, really. And, that started very much with kind of an intermittent fasting protocol. And I started to consolidate all my consumption of food within an 8-hour window, just started there. And I began to see very, very good results. But kind of
meaning you started to feel good, and then you looked and you thought, "Oh, my body's also changing." What?
I mean, I think there was sort of two parallel processes going on. One, I was asking myself, like, really, how did I evolve? Like Gabby, you and I essentially we're wearing the same genes, if you will, as our hunter-gatherer ancestors. Evolution is stultifyingly slow. Yeah. But culture is very fast. So where are those evolutionary mismatches? Where has culture essentially hijacked our biology? Because I'm actually meant to be fat, but not all the time, right? I'm meant to be just a little bit fat.
Squishier.
A little squishier in the late summer, early fall. Why? Because there used to be a winter, right? And my body was engineered over hundreds of thousands of years as Homo sapiens, but like millions of years as hominids, to be a little fat because it knew that the paucity of winter was coming and there would not be this surfeit of calories anymore. So, we'd harvest these wonderful figs and fruits and everything in the fall. We'd gorge ourselves. We'd put on a little bit of fat. There was no Instagram, so, it wasn't vilifying, right? And then over the course of the winter, our bodies would essentially oxidize that fat and use it for energy, but also activate all these other pathways that were stimulated by nutrient deficiency. And I won't get like too geeky there, but this was part of my process, was learning, because for me, I actually had to understand the underlying mechanism in order to actually do the protocol. Yeah. So I wanted to learn about AMP kinase and autophagy and repair pathways and all of these things and mitobiogenesis and, like stuff that I think for some people gets a little bit too geeky. But for me, I actually really embrace going deep into the science and the mechanism because that helped me actually understand the nature of my organism and then tweak the protocols. So so in an intermittent fasting protocol, because I was making conscious decisions, because I became a disciple essentially to that practice, I was making other conscious decisions. Like, of course, during a fasting protocol, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to calorically restrict. You could eat 20 pints of chubby hubby, and I'm sure it's been done in an 8-hour window, but that's not what I was doing. I was essentially adopting kind of a ketotarian approach, so cut way, way down on carbohydrate intake and stacked that with this intermittent fasting protocol, and lo and behold, my blood sugar started to go down. Oh, that makes, of course, a tremendous amount of sense. I was also dropping weight because I was calorically restricting. And even if you eat the same calories in a tighter window, you will tend to metabolize those. You use those calories for energy creation instead of storage,
right? Generally.
So that was one thing. And I started to stack other sort of, uncomfortable protocols. Ice baths was certainly one of them. And like, I'm one of these like neurotic Jews that like, you even look at a lake and I go into sort of a panic attack, So that was a big thing, but then there was Wim Hof, So it's like, okay, I guess we'll do it.
Yeah.
He's here.
Was it, did you start with like a couple of times a week, or were you like, that's it, I'm going to go in every day?
Well, when he was there, it was awful because.
And then he stands over you and yells at you, right?
Yeah. He's like, now, Jeff, you're going to get into the ice plunge, you're going to do the breathe, and then you're going to do the horse dance, and you're going to activate the anti-inflammatory cytokines, whatever, I'm just and like, you're gonna shut up, I'm dying.
Change the world, Jeff. Come on.
And with him, we had a commercial ice delivery coming every morning. So he would get it to like a nice crispy 34 degrees. Ooh, I wouldn't recommend that actually to anyone, particularly someone who's starting a practice. As I began to personalize that practice, which means maybe you didn't go quite to 34.
No. Right. Okay.
I was getting benefit at like 58, 55. And you're looking at me askance.
No, I'm sorry.
You wimp.
No. I think this is important because it's funny. If you go and people go, okay, well, most people don't have access necessarily to a cold plunge. It's getting certainly more popular, but let's say you go cold shower.
Yeah.
Depending on where you live, that can be not only really cold, but people don't realize when you have water hitting you at full blast, it is actually harder than if you were to sit in a cold plunge.
100%.
Because it's like wind chill factor.
Yeah, you're getting pelted.
So I want to say to people, sometimes you hear this, but you don't realize that you can get a relationship with this. And it's normal. Your body's instinct is, get me out of here, because it's not for long-term, it's not safe. But once you get a hold of your breath and you kind of calm things down, the first 30 seconds usually are the worst. And then you find a place with it.
Yeah. Totally. And cold appears to be subjective. As long as it feels cold, it seems to confer benefits. And then, of course, there's like the ongoing challenge of increasing duration and decreasing temperature. And that's a wonderful challenge to confront every day. I mean, I have a cold plunge, fortunately. I look at it, with some degree of, anger every morning. And as soon as I feel that, that's when I get in.
So do you get hot before? Or do you go right in? No, I do too.
Yeah, I do the contrast bathing. And there's some good reasons for that, just because, obviously it makes them easier, right?
Yes.
But otherwise, you can hide that under the guise of, vasodilation that happens in the sauna and vasoconstriction that happens in the cold. And if you kind of go back and forth, you're having that dilation, constriction. That's very beneficial for circulatory system, for your lymph, et cetera. And it makes it easier to get in, sure. You always have to finish cold because again, this is sort of like wearing the cilice. You have to, it's penance for all your sins.
Yeah.
But what I also, so then that practice was, and I actually started to tweak with the protocol stack. This is actually, I'll turn the tables slightly just because I can't help, deny my podcaster DNA. So I started to cadence my cold plunging at the very, very end of my fasting window, but before I took my first bite of food. And for those who are interested in actually shedding fat, I found this to be incredibly efficient for the following reason. So I was not eating a lot of carbs, so lower glucose levels. And then after 15 and a half hours, lower because I wasn't eating anything, right? And then before putting anything in my mouth, I would get into the cold plunge. Now, what happens when you get into a cold plunge? Well, a lot of different things. This is one of them. But more physiologically, or that's physiological, but what's happening is your core body temperature plummets, right? And your body is just miraculously engineered for homeostasis. It's seeking out the Goldilocks zone always in so many different ways. I love talking about that. It's maybe later. But so it's then goes into this process of thermogenesis because it's looking for that warm porridge of 98.6. So, okay, what does it do? Well, it has to make heat. It needs energy to make heat. It needs a substrate to make that energy, to make that heat. So it scans the body for that substrate. But guess what? After 15 and a half hours of not eating and a very low carb diet, there ain't a lot of glucose around. So what does it have as its other option? Fat, right? So it's going to oxidize triglycerides, break them into free fatty acids to use as that substrate to warm your body back up. And when I kind of discovered that little Rubik's Cube combination, that Tetris, I could almost watch the weight melt off. And I became very metabolically active and flexible. And that little trifecta was very, very key on my journey. And then there was a few other ones that I started to layer on after that.
How did this practice, shortening your eating window, adding cold and measuring and some other things, how did that impact your still real life stress? Like, what was the relationship with, let's say, bad stress, which is, work, traffic, good stress, we'll get into defining that. But how was the relationship with the bad stress? How did that change based on just you changing a few practices?
You're such a good host.
Oh.
Yeah.
You mean my coffee's good, right?
Your coffee's good. No, that's not what I mean. This is you ask the right questions at the right time. So it's really interesting that, yes, I just broke down some of the physiological benefits of fasting and cold water therapy, but I found that the most potent attribute of those practices was not physiological. It was actually psychological. So just because my eating window was like 10:30 to 6:30, didn't mean that I didn't crave a Snickers at 9 p.m. or something, right? Or maybe not a Snickers, but you know what I mean. But because I was committed to that practice, instead of sort of mindlessly wandering to the pantry, to pick out, some gluten-free something or other, I had to witness the nature of the hunger. So in that observation, I had to untangle whether or not that stimulus, that hunger, was a biological need. Did I need this to survive? Or was it a psychological or emotional desire? Which one was it? And in that space, what I discovered was almost every single time it was a psychological desire. I was eating my feelings in some way or another. And because modernity allows us to assuage our stress with a surfeit of shelf-stable calories, it's always right there. That's, I think, a huge contributor to the obesity issue. But in essentially that process, like Viktor Frankl, for example, he said, right, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is a choice. In that choice lies our freedom and liberation. So this practice of fasting propelled me into that space between stimulus, the hunger, and response, the eating or the not eating. And that gave me a certain power. that I could apply. It was protean, I suppose, in nature. Like I could apply that same ability to other stressful situations as they would inevitably arise. So like my children who will, spare no moment to try to aggravate me or annoy me in some way, instead of just knee-jerk reaction, yelling back at them. No, there is a space there where I could examine what is the nature, what is the origin of their behavior right now, and what is the most appropriate response. At work, all the time, in conflict with colleagues or people, no, take a step back. What is, again, the provenance of their action or their behavior, and what is the most appropriate response? The same is really true for a cold water therapy, because when you get into the cold plunge, your body has a totally normal, involuntary, adaptive response. What happens? Like bottom-up sympathetic response, like epinephrine coursing through your veins. I often feel it in my neck. I'm like, I'm going to panic. And then you have, again, that moment at your disposal to apply top-down pressure on top of bottom-up involuntary response. Sometimes that's through conscious breath, and you can essentially engage in some sort of parasympathetic breath work to push that back down. Sometimes it's just leveraging, your neo-mammalian prefrontal cortex. I'm going to be fine right now. Yeah. Okay? 30 seconds, I'll be fine. Okay. And again, that skill begins to punctuate other areas of your life. Like I sometimes joke, I have all this dentist work right now. I hate the dentist. It's like awesome, just odious process. But when Dr. Nikki is poised, God bless Dr. Nikki, wonderful dentist. Hate the dentist in general, love Dr. Nikki. But when she's poised with that 12-inch syringe about to go into the most sensitive part of your body.
And you don't like needles.
Yeah, and I don't like needles, but particularly in my mouth, I don't like them.
You have to not look, by the way.
Yeah. It's a very similar physiological experience as when you get into the ice bath. What's happening? I'm out of control. Epinephrine. Amygdala hijack, whatever. I can't do anything about it. But this is why I double down on my cold plunge when I'm going to see Dr. Nikki, because it is, again, essentially you're developing an ability to emotionally regulate, to be untriggerable. And in this moment in time, when essentially the world is out to trigger you, that we literally live within an economy that has taken Gabby Reece's attention and focus and commodified it and sold it, literally productized it. So everyone and everything is vying for that at all times. That's what's happening. To be able to be untriggerable and to emotionally regulate is perhaps like the greatest skill that you can develop.
It's an interesting thing, like when I hear you say that, because I spend a lot of time observing things. I'm not a big dive in. You have to really penetrate my personal bubble. Like if you know what I mean? Like if you're really coming for me, then I might be like, okay, I've got to activate here. Right. But otherwise it's observing. But what's interesting is, and I'm curious how you do it, then you have your real everyday relationships, your friends, your partner, your children. And it's like, how do I re-engage fully and wholly so that myself is right at the surface, but then somehow there's still a distance from, stimulus and response because you want it to be genuine, right? Like that's the one I'm always still dancing with, where I have found the way to be not untriggerable. I definitely have, especially one kid who can just do it in about 4 seconds. And I always watch myself. I'm like, there I go. I go in the hole. So I guess what I'm interested in is this also interesting thing of, and you're still managing a practice within it to how are you invested, you care, it's everything. And I'm still going to find a way to make room for these people in my life to have their feelings, their comments, their actions, whatever it is that they're doing. For me, that's been the next step of not getting so far away that because it's almost like a defense mechanism too, where if I'm sitting right here, and I'm right on the edge because I'm close to you. Now is the next graduated where it's like I'm managing that space is much shorter.
Yeah.
Because I can look online all day and it looks like theater to me.
Yeah.
It doesn't trigger me. It looks like theater, quite frankly. But when I'm engaged with someone I'm intimate with, how do I lean all the way in, but yet I find the space there too? That's the sort of the constant work.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the tightrope. So there's a concept in Buddhism as part of the Brahma Vihara. It's called upekkha. So it's often translated as equanimity. And I think a lot of people consider equanimity sort of this limp, conciliatory, numb, dissociative approach to life. But really, on the contrary, really what it's about is bringing your full, passionate self to the here and now, to the moment, but without over-attachment to the result. And of course, this is a tricky, there could be, there's a few sort of spiritual tests or searches or paths, that are maybe as difficult as that, but not many. Of essentially, how do you commit fully to something without being attached to it?
Yeah.
And it's tricky. I mean, it's funny, you talk about managing space. I think you must know the Gracie guys, right? Yeah, Henner and Huron. And they were introducing me to basically BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
And there's a lot in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu about managing space. Mm-hmm. It's like the place you can get really, really hurt the most is like a little bit closer than we are now, where I could leverage all of my weight and just pop you in the nose. I'd never do that in a million years, just out of fear. But there's two ways we can then pursue safety. Mm-hmm. One is I can recoil and run away or just create more space. The other way is to lean way, way, way in, and then you're just kind of, you can't leverage any weight. You're just patting me on the back. And I think this is applicable metaphorically to how we can engage with people. We can essentially disarm an insult by being unaffected by it. That's basically like retreat, move away.
Yeah.
Or we can really, really lean in. And candidly, this was kind of an interesting component of my approach to stress, because there were all these interesting adversity mimetics and physiological stressors that sort of mimic Paleolithic stress. I was super into those. But then I started to apply stress protocols to this more psychosocial part of my life, where I began to really, really lean in to stressful conversations, like really almost purposefully engage in the most stressful conversations that I could. And there was a whole process to this of sort of building my psychological immune system. But I ended up in 2020, as kind of part of the research for this book, having 26 or 28 hour-long Zoom calls with people that don't like me.
Who doesn't like you?
Well, there was plenty.
What does that mean?
Plenty of people to choose from.
What is the we don't need to know who, but like, what is the idea that's attached to you that people don't like?
Right. So,
or what are you talking about that they don't like?
Sure. So we anchored into port lockdown in March 2020.
Yeah.
And Jake, my co-founder, beloved partner, Jake, one of the most capable men in the world.
He's a ball breaker. I love it.
He was like, "Oh, Jeff, people are really scared. They're feeling lonely. You should write a weekly newsletter and deploy it to our, sizable, I think at that point it was 1.2 million people."
Yeah.
So I was like, I very naively agreed to this task. I was like, "Oh yeah, I can like package up emotions and thoughts as like little buoys that people can use to navigate the rough seas of COVID or something, something along those lines." And then I got like 3 or 4 weeks in and I was like, oh shit, this is a lot of work. I got to write 1,500 or 2,000 words every week, every Sunday. But sort of fortunately for my literary career, and somewhat unfortunately for society at large, 2020 offered plenty of incendiary fodder around which to write. And I just really dove in. So I was writing about race in the wake of the George Floyd murder. I was writing about, obviously, COVID quite a bit. I was writing about, Trumpistan and the election and the rise of QAnon and all these topics, and I was really trying to come at it from a sort of thoughtful, rigorously approached, like I'm going to write a middle way kind of article to like lower the temperature, right? But across 2,000 words, you're going to offend someone with some sort of turn of phrase. I'll give you like a particular example. So in August 2020, there seemed to be enough data to suggest that the people that were contracting the virus most severely were also suffering from other comorbidities.
4 points of comorbidity.
Yeah. And oftentimes diabetes, oftentimes obesity. Yeah. And these were people that were most likely to be hospitalized and unfortunately die. And there was enough data to actually write a fairly rigorously researched article on that topic. And of course, my intention was really to like pull that curtain back on that. It's like, hey, this is an opportunity.
It's exciting. We can do something about it.
There's some agency here. Of course, and I just will also say I attached my personal email to all of these missives. It was just, in retrospect, not necessarily something I'd always advise someone, but at that juncture, I was doing it. Of course, that article also coincided with a very potent body positivity movement. And of course, I had written voluminously, and anyone listening knows that I'm a loquacious fellow at this juncture, about my own chubbiness and being overweight. And so I thought I had sort of defanged that a bit, but no, there was a lot of people that took great, great offense and didn't hesitate for a moment to let me know. So I think that Monday morning, the email would go out on Sunday. Monday morning, there'd be like literally a deluge of opprobrium and recrimination cresting the bow of my inbox. And, 500, 600 emails, many of which were very encouraging, very nice. But like a good 150 that was like, you're a dick. And that was kind of the more blunt way. And then there were some that were thoughtful. And then I would engage.
You did engage?
Yeah. Then I did engage thoughtfully. And then after 2 or 3 emails back and forth, I pulled what sometimes I call my David Copperfield routine. I would say, hey, why don't you join me for a Zoom call? Zoom was getting popular at that juncture. And I call it my David Copperfield routine because at that juncture, I made most people disappear.
They didn't want to get on.
No. But 26 people took me up on it. So I started to schedule hour-long Zoom calls on Mondays and Tuesday afternoons with people that had some beef.
You know what's so funny about this? This is, first of all, you're brave because sometimes it's not about you. It's just where they're directing that energy. So that's part of life. And I do feel like as adults, we're actually supposed to take that on, because you learn it as a parent or a boss. You go, oh, I'm sort of an actor in this play, but this isn't really fully about me, but I also can be here to make space for someone. I can understand them more. We can converse, whatever. But, when I hear that, did it get easier? Because what I have found is anytime I don't have an agreement with somebody, really once you connect, it just finds its way to work out. Even if we agree to disagree, there is that humanity that no matter what you could be, and literally not agree anymore, but look at each other, even if it's through Zoom, and go, but you're a person and I'm a person.
Totally.
And the fact that you would take an hour and give it to me, that's also what a lot of people are looking for, right? Like namaste is I see you, right? Like that's also part of the deal is I think people want to be seen and heard.
You just totally nailed it. That was what I awoke to, is that people just wanted to be seen and heard. Yeah. And for me, because I was a very sensitive human and I was a people pleaser for the reasons that I elucidated before around my upbringing, I was initially very, very defensive at sort of incoming insult. And I would, stay up at night and brood over sort of clever rejoinders, whatever, like hold the little ember of resentment, and I was going to throw it in the morning, but, I was getting burned, right? Because I was up all night. Eventually, I really did build my psychological immune system to it. And, very, very similarly to how you build your physiological immune system through some degree of exposure to pathogen, right? To bacteria and virus, and your, little adaptive immune system spins up these proteins until it finds ding, 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 the right one. Yeah. You call that an antibody, and it sort of neuters the antigen, and brilliantly, your body remembers that. And these memory cells can then sort of denude a virus when it comes into contact with it again. Very similarly with your psychological immune system, I built that up through some degree of exposure to insult, so much so that sometimes I wouldn't actually read any of the positive emails. I was actually looking for the ones that were more critical. And because I was able to get comfortable with that, when I created this sort of forum for these people, I was very, very calm going into it. So I was creating a very kind of safe set and setting for them to, Thomas Hewell is a brilliant guy. He calls this attunement or heart coherence, et cetera, is that if you can create that bubble of safety and trust, people will then open up and connect. And the pattern of these conversations was so interesting. In fact, they almost all looked exactly the same. We would get, jab at a few buttons. We were not quite as gifted with the Zoom at that juncture. And then exchange a couple of pleasantries, and then it would be 45 minutes of them talking at me. And it wouldn't be anything to do with the issue that had put us at loggerheads. It would just be their life story. Yeah. And their pets that had passed away, and a problem that they were having with their health, or, their uncle had just passed away, or whatever. I just heard life story after life story. And I came to that realization that you already put your thumb on, which is people just wanted to be seen and heard, particularly in that moment. Yeah.
And and people were scared.
Yeah.
We're walking around scared.
Totally.
And because there's all this expectation of what we should be doing and, need to be doing. And a lot of people are isolated. So it's sometimes when you have that ability, when you're feeling good enough yourself, that you can hold space for I always liken it a little bit sometimes when our kids are little and they just are tired and they're out of their minds, and you just go, it's okay. Yeah, you're tired. So I was thinking about this because of Skylar's practices and her yoga and wanderlust and all this knowledge and surrounded by this. So I would imagine, did you ever meditate prior to this epiphany towards moving some of your daily practices towards good stress?
Yeah, some. I mean, I had what I might call a very rickety meditation practice.
Yeah.
Ironically, a lot of these physiological protocols enhanced my meditation practice, really. And then I started to really see a bi-directional relationship between my psychological and emotional health and my physical health. I started adopting a squatting practice, for example. That's a physiological practice, but I don't mean squatting in a gym. I mean just a resting squat.
Yeah.
Because of course, this is how I evolved. I didn't have a comfy lazy boy on the Serengeti, or my hunter-gatherer ancestor didn't. I had to squat. That was a natural position. And this guy Light Watkins,
I love Light.
Yeah, we were having this conversation one day in Topanga. It's like a business conversation, and he was squatting the whole time. I'm like, dude, you must be dying. He's like, no, this is quite natural. And he's like, you try it. I was like, I couldn't even get my butt down below my knees. my heels were way off the ground. He was like, "Oh, I'll help you." He put like a piece of
So
firewood.
would you bolster for in the beginning?
Yeah, I put like a wedge or a piece of firewood under my heels to kind of stabilize, and then I started to do it every day. And now it's
for a minute. Like, would you just do for a couple minutes? Like, because for example, I have a fake knee, and I'm always forcing myself. I can't get my butt down to my heels.
Yeah, I can't quite either. I have a fake hip.
Oh, that's right. So it's always like I just go, okay, I'm going to do the best I can right now. And sometimes I'm bolstered way up. Like, it almost looks like a chair on the ground.
Yeah.
But just to remind people that it isn't about. I had a friend, she's a yoga teacher, Lulu, in Kauai, and Lulu's like, "Where are you trying to go?" Right. Because for her, she can put her chest on the floor, and me, I'm just going to be able to get books off the floor with my chest. Yeah. And she's like, "Yeah, but where are you trying to go?" And I think sometimes when people hear this change that you've made, they don't realize that you're not trying to do everything all at once in the first day, in the first week, and in the first month. No. And that these things aren't perfect, that your cold tub might be at 50. It doesn't mean your cold tub's at 32, but that there are incremental.
It's the only way to do it, really. I mean, a lot of people talk about this. I think Alan Watts had a funny little turn around this, where he's like, you never quit drinking for a year, because then the devil knows. And he knows he can come back and tempt you every day. Mm-hmm. You just say, no, just today, I will refuse that tumbler of Casamigos or whatever, just for today. And so this is it. It's just, it is easy, does it step by step. But the amazing thing is it doesn't take the body long. We're so accustomed to downward spirals in health, but what I experience is an upward spiral, and those are possible too. And, I saw that even within months, But this squatting practice, and I was far from where like Watkins was, and I still am, but I'm pretty good. And like the shape and the strength of my quads, totally changed. And I felt very comfortable in a squat. And, whatever, I would get tempted into some like Curb Your Enthusiasm at night or whatever with my kids. And instead of just like lounging on the couch, I would be like, okay, I'm here, but I'm going to do it in a resting squat, at least for 10 minutes at a time or something. But where this became really interesting in terms of how physiology impacts psychology is that, as you know, I'm a tennis player, and I'm still take it probably too seriously. And I often find myself, playing against some specimen, 30-year-old ex-Div 1, beast that's like going to dissect me. But the more I started to feel like solid and secure in my squatting and my quads, the more I started to know that, okay, you might be hitting some winners right now. You might be up a break of serve or two, but I'll still be here in 2.5 hours. Where will you be? Yeah. Are you still going to be here with me? And most of the time, I'd lose. As I told you, I was demoted from a 5-0 to a 4-5. But there was a psychology to that where I felt like I would never lose. And that gave me a sort of a freedom and a freeness with my playing that was amazing. And so that was one way where I was like, oh yeah, working on your physiology is going to have mental benefits. And then of course there's so many ways that the opposite is true. Yeah.
I think as a person who, there's plenty of people and I've, you're an intellectual person, but it is something kind of reconfirming to hear you say that if we do some of these physical good stresses and little practices, that we will be able to navigate our emotions easier. I've said it a million times. The reason I want people to feel as good as they can is, for me, it was the quickest, easiest therapy to getting over whatever my stories are. Yeah. by my physical practices, my deep breathing, heat and ice, that just helped me get to that place better. And I know there's people who can do it the other way. There's monks who can meditate and they, their brain matter looks different and they're different. But it's such a almost involuntary way for it to happen. And in that way, I find it easier. So you have to make this space. You have to have the kind of discipline or practice. But ultimately, it just felt like, oh, this is way easier than me trying to, what do they say? You can't really think yourself out of a feeling problem.
Right.
And it feels like the body helps you even deal with that.
Totally. These somatic practices have all sorts of physiological or psychological impacts. I mean, if you look at the way, for example, animals metabolize stress and trauma, it's really interesting. There's a whole variety of different ways. So like a gazelle, for example, even after they've escaped a predator, will run 2 or 3 miles, right? To metabolize
Get it out, yeah.
that stress. Like dogs and possum, they'll shake, right? There's some other interesting, like primates, like chimps and stuff, they'll groom each other and themselves. Yeah. So that's another thing you can try at home. Groom each other, like pick little nits out of each other.
No, but that's an important point. Like I've been with Laird long enough, 29 years, where when there's tension, right? He was the first one to teach me this. He would sometimes look at me and rather than more talking, he would just come up and give me a hug.
Right.
And even if I was like, no, he would, and I've learned that when he's stomping around or whatever, if I just go up and, I don't have to talk or be like, let's fix it. Now's the time to make it better. I just put my hand on him and it's like, I love you and I'm here and now I'm going to go away because you have some stuff going on.
Right.
But I think sometimes to your point about that space, that leaning in, even in the place of the unknown, we're not going to solve this right now.
Yeah.
I care and I'm here. Yeah. And so I think that those types of practices also give you the confidence to be the first one too. Because sometimes we have to be the first one. Either maybe the first one to go, well, what, something going on? Or I'm sorry. Or just a hand. Because we oftentimes get taught in our world that, well, you're wrong and I'm right, so you need to make it right. Or you're the one who's got a problem, so you're the one who has to, versus, hey, what could I do to make this better? Yeah.
And also to be emotionally available and aware when other people need that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Crying, for example, we tend to stigmatize it in our society as a sign of weakness. But crying is actually a fascinating emotional regulation technique, or adaptive response, I should say. So there's like a bunch of different kinds of tears. There's just kind of the normal basal tears that keep your eyes moist. And then there's like the onion cutting tears, which I had yesterday. And those are just like reactive tears. But then when we have emotional tears as humans, and we're very unique in this regard, you can, if you actually put those tears in a chemistry lab and test them, you will find adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. This is a stress hormone. So when someone is crying, what they're doing is like they're literally flushing out stress to essentially, again, come back to the middle, come back to homeostasis. And often crying also elicits like big, long, deep breaths.
Yeah.
Of course, that is another way that you can emotionally regulate. And it's also a sign, as you say, for, it's almost like a sign that you are vulnerable and that you need that connection or that touch. And so when you see someone crying, if you're a compassionate human being, your instinct is to go and comfort them. So it's a way, so crying is a tool for social connection, as well. And so, this is what I really, tell people, like other team leaders and other business leaders, is like, don't stigmatize crying in your office, for example. Like, let people cry. It's fine. Don't stigmatize it, because it's a way that we find social homeostasis. It's funny. One other way is in the animal kingdom is wolves. I read recently, they howl. Their howling is actually an emotional regulation technique. And when they howl in groups, it's to sort of reestablish that kind of social homeostasis again. So you can also try howling as a team. This is kind of fun.
What do you have to do if you have to fire somebody? Because you're a boss, you're running stuff. There's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
Because I guess what happens is we think we're sort of on one side of a coin or another, right? Like I'm either, grinding through my day and I sort of just getting it done. And if the minute somebody is trying to be a little more conscientious, conscious, choose your words, choose your responses, they think that doesn't still have a blade available. So when it's time, let's do work first, because work is, I don't want to say it's easier, but it's just different. When you go, hey, we've had this conversation 4 times and this person, it's just not the right fit. Mm-hmm. Do you have to go to a different side of your personality? How do you navigate the blade out of the thoughtful, conscious, purposeful person?
Yeah, was hard for me. This was a lesson that I did not learn easily, because I would have my natural instinct would be like, oh, let's just give them one more chance,
Yeah. But then would you resent that too, simultaneously?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to be firm and direct, yet compassionate at the same time. And candidly, that's even just in the last couple of years, I've had to do that. Fortunately, our ethos at Commune is such that this happens very, very, very rarely. And we've had essentially no turnover in 4 or 5 years. We have the same 15 people basically working there. And that was a hard-wrought lesson. At Wanderlust was the absolute opposite. We had massive turnover. It was so stressful all the time. And, when I started Commune, I was like, oh man, I really need to apply the lessons that I learned at Wanderlust in terms of how to operate an organization. And I started to, actually apply a lot of the leadership lessons of Taoism to kind of organizational structure. And it's really, really worked. A lot of kind of very decentralized decision-making, but a lot of very centralized mission fluency. So people are always looking through the same lens in which to make decisions. And that allows me to be like, let go. You make the decisions.
So how did you establish that?
Just from the beginning, was really spending a tremendous amount of time onboarding new employees and really basically not just getting them to drink the Kool-Aid, but essentially socializing the dream and the vision. That's the key to scaling businesses that I learned, is like, make your dream the dream of someone else. And if you can do that, boy, you can let go. I mean, at Wanderlust, I was in every meeting. I really thought I was the smartest guy in every meeting. And was I wrong about that? Oh my God. I thought I'll design the logo. Never mind the creative director. I'll do it. What an idiot I was.
But where do you think that, because I think a lot of people feel that way, especially when it's their baby.
Yeah.
So I think when I was doing my homework, I think you talk about not letting being productive take over. Because this is another side of it that I know I'm navigating, is we're busy, we're getting stuff done. It's like this validates my life and my time that I have to deal with all this stuff and my stress. There's a reason I have stress, right? And so we hide in that busyness, that work. So I think you talk about where we all want to produce and be productive, but you're sort of like, hey, but you can't let that take over what your whole life is about.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think we can hide behind the cloak of busyness and use our stress as sort of a badge in some ways. Look at me, busy all day, taking phone calls and sending emails. I must be contributing to society and be worth something because I'm doing that. But of course, it's like so easy to get lost within that. A. B. My life has taught me that wisdom almost always comes in the spaces. it almost always comes on a walk or a hike or some opportunity that I've given myself not to be busy. And we all know that by product of our own experience. Like sometimes it just happens in very prosaic ways. Like, oh, I can't remember that person's name. I can't quite shine the spotlight of my consciousness on Bob's name, but I know what it isn't. I know it's not Frank, and I know it's not Fred, but I just can't nail it right now. Oh, well, fuck it. And then you go for a walk, and then all of a sudden, it's Bob. I knew it was Bob. Somehow it seeped up from under the crust of consciousness. And that is how wisdom almost always appears, or creative ideas. So you have to give yourself space. And this sort of like comes down to this like modern obsession that we have, that everything that is bigger or grows faster is better, right? GDP must be the best metric of a healthy society. Never mind how many people are in prison or how we're degrading our environment, but GDP, the Dow Jones, whatever. And I was very connected to that idea. At Wanderlust, I was always like top line guy, 20 million this year, 25 million, 30 million. This is, this is a symptom of a society that's gone awry, because in nature, growth is always balanced by repair and restoration, right? Winter always promises a spring, always delivers it. But there has these times of sort of growth and expansion, and then retraction and reparation. And that is also true for the human being, because of course we are nature. So we need to provide for that. But, we tend to be all yang and no yin.
Yeah, I know I've had to add a lot of yin in my life.
Yeah.
It's the stillness is this, until you build a relationship with it and have your own definition of success, it is the scariest place to be with yourself and your thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, there's that great Blaise Pascal quote, right? All of man's problems stem from the inability for him to be quiet in a room alone. That's not quite how he said it, but you get the gist. And it's true. I mean, our entire experience of reality is through the perception or the prism of our mind.
Yeah.
And how, are we going to live essentially with monkey mind? Thoughts are branches and we're just swinging sort of wildly, riotously from one to one. That's how many of us that's the default mode network for so many people, including myself from time to time. And then I have to catch myself and say, no, that's not the way I want to live.
Yeah.
It's not the way I want to live.
Do you beat yourself up, or do you give yourself grace?
Less beating myself up. I'll beat myself up in the gym, but that's not what you're talking about.
Well, that's the good stress.
Yeah.
But do you, when you're trying to make these changes or do a change, are you like, oh, come on, Jeff, like, what's your problem? Or are you focused on the task at hand? Like, how do you navigate those places that are sometimes looking at ourselves and our faults and flaws and weaknesses is not easy.
Yeah. I'm better at it. And largely because I trust myself more. And knowing that mistakes will inevitably occur. So like nature, for example, is just a perfect architect, but not a perfect carpenter. There are mutations, for example. There's single nucleotide polymorphisms, right? But those mutations are sometimes adaptive, right? They're part of evolution. So those faults, sometimes lead to some form of growth. So you really just need, I don't say you just need, but for me, I trust myself in the way that I am trying to essentially see myself as nature, knowing that nature makes mistakes. And that's tricky because in the Western world, we're actually taught to distrust nature. and see it as something outside of ourselves, because kind of in the best case scenario, it comes up as weeds and pests. So let's spray it, get rid of that nature. But also because we have these sensory instruments that are perceived threat. And so we see threat outside of ourselves. And, for thousands of years, we went and killed all the megafauna around us because they were a threat. So, forget the giant bears and the sloths and the saber-toothed tigers. We'll get rid of all of them. And then like Louis Pasteur came around in the mid 1800s and he said, no, it's not the megafauna that's killing us. It's the things we can't see. It's the viruses and the bacteria. So then we spent the last 160 years killing off all of them in our soil, in our guts, et cetera. And then when you don't have any more predators, like you turn against yourself, and we seem to be doing quite an adequate job with that. And so I think that whatever, never mind what Abrahamic religions teaches us about nature, as it's something to be, of course, that we have dominion over, and it's something to subdue, particularly the part of ourselves that is nature, human nature, because it's sinful and base and will return to dust. So we should really focus on this kind of eternal soul thing that, some wizard blew into our nostril. And so, for me, it's like a lot of my, of like getting more comfortable with myself is sort of reframing my, my relationship with nature, really seeing myself as part of it. That's like, and I'm not hawking my book at all.
Well,
it's just right here.
Yeah.
But you see, like on the cover of my book, there is like these blades of grass, like growing through a sidewalk or endless asphalt. And I think we've all experienced that walking in an urban environment where, we look down and we see, oh my God, there's a flower growing through the sidewalk. How incredible, like there's an eternal reliability to nature. That's a true place that we can put our trust and faith in. And when we start to see ourselves as that blade of grass, that's pretty empowering.
In talking about good stress, because all of these practices have this benefit, and we always joke in our house, like choose your hard, because your heart's going to choose you. I think a million people say it a different way, right? Jocko Willink says something else about like you picking it. I think Jordan Peterson talks about it as well, like just this idea. And so I always joke that I like to pay up front. So I'll do my best. I don't get it all the time, but I'll try to work hard and take care of my body, train. For the most part, put things in it that I think support my health. Choose your reaction closer to who I think I'm trying to be versus sometimes my impulse. Because my impulse is really my fear that shows up as probably a form of aggression. Because it's a protective mechanism, right? I'll just use like force and everything to navigate blocking that I'm afraid or unsure. So when we talk about, you were talking about movement, these little practices, getting in nature, cold exposure, what are some of the other things in good stress that maybe people wouldn't even realize, like, oh, wait, that's a positive stress that would be good for me. What are some of the other things that you found that are pretty easy at hand?
Yeah. Well, I think, the most obvious form of good stress is probably muscle hypertrophy, right? You overload a muscle, let's say a biceps, you micro tear the fibers in there. There's an immune response. Yeah. And then what happens? Your body has an adaptive response to stress. So it motivates all these structural proteins, myosin and actin, and provided that you give it enough rest and you eat your branched chain amino acids and enough leucine, et cetera, it will grow back stronger, right, and bigger. And that is the most sort of like, I guess on some level, obvious example of
low-hanging
stress,
fruit,
right?
For sure.
It's like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Thank you. Is it Nietzsche or Kelly Clarkson? I'm not sure. Probably both. depending about your cultural
who you are,
anchoring.
right?
Yeah. But I think one of the really like cool things, and I'm like fascinated with human physiology, mostly because I think that like the metaphysical is patterned in the physical. Like if you really want to understand the foundational intelligence of the cosmos, study this thing, study your organism, because that is where it is patterned. So like, for example, hypoxia, okay? So what happens when you hold your breath for a long time or you go to high altitudes or whatever? High altitude is like less partial pressure of oxygen. The air is less dense, but you can in some ways mimic that by holding your breath for a long time. So whatever, you have like a hypoxia, like a debt of oxygen, and then you have a glut of carbon dioxide, hypercapnia, I believe that's called. You have these incredible little like chemoreceptors on your carotid artery or somewhere around the sides of your neck, and they give a signal to your body to create this kind of protein. It's called EPO. I think it's erythropoietin or something. And they tell your body to make more red blood cells. And that makes a ton of sense because your red blood cells are the couriers for oxygen through your bloodstream to your mitochondria for the production of energy. So when there's less oxygen around, what happens in your body? It gets better endogenously at creating energy. Your mitochondria become more efficient. Carbon dioxide is also controls like pH balance in the body. So if you hold your breath and you have a glut of carbon dioxide, your body's going to get a little bit more acidic, and that acidity actually lessens the affinity between hemoglobin and oxygen. So hemoglobin is a little protein in your red blood that shuttles, the oxygen to the cells, and it's more likely to let it go. Nirvana, let it go. Yeah. I think the more we can recognize our body's adaptive responses to stress, the more we can start to engage in the behaviors and the protocols that leverage the body's wisdom, right? So whether or not that's like, thermogenesis or thermoregulation, what happens when you get into a hot sauna? You're pre-programmed to sweat and perspire. And guess what? You also activate BDNF and heat shock proteins and endorphins, your internal pharmacy, internal, morphine, basically internal opioids, and all of the cardiovascular benefits that you get from a sauna. Let's say you go out and get early morning light. What is your body pre-programmed to do? Well, for hundreds of thousands of years, we basically slept outside or very immersed in nature. And what did we get? We got blue light from the superior field of the sky into the inferior part of our retina. We have developed over hundreds of thousands of years these sensory neurons, these intrinsically sensitive neural ganglion cells or retinal ganglion cells that essentially send a little notice down to our suprachiasmatic nucleus, the timekeeper of the human body, which then tells the pineal gland, hey, it's morning time, release melatonin about 14 hours or so, so you can get good sleep. And sleep is foundational to health. Of course, all of those things that I just elucidated have essentially been ripped away. We've denuded all of those things from our daily quotidian experience. And my theory is like now we actually have to self-impose them because culture has ripped them away. And that's essentially what like the notion of good stress or all the protocols related to good stress are about. It's essentially self-imposing those health conferring sort of Paleolithic stressors that make good use of the fact that for hundreds of thousands of years, we've developed these hard wrought adaptive advantages.
I up until about 5 months ago, I would have said that nutrition was the pinnacle, right? But I'd say in the last 5 or 6 months, I would actually say getting enough sunlight trumps that. I would put that at the number one. And it's funny, Laird wakes up in the dark. I don't like to wake up in the dark. I think it's offensive. I like to be in my bed snugly. Laird has a bike set up over there. And he rides his bike and watches the sunrise every day. And we talk about setting your circadian rhythm by looking at the sun. And people, I think things that have become normal practices are now perceived as woo-woo. And what you're talking about is just science and how, and in a way, what I love about that is that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah. I mean, if you're at high latitudes in certain times of the year, harder to get morning light, but there are ways to do it. You know, these seasonal affective disorder lamps, SAD lamps, they're like 10,000 lux. You sit 12 inches away from them for 20 minutes and you can more or less simulate that, you know, blue light, essentially that little band of, 480 nanometers on the electromagnetic wave spectrum that seem to, ensure that you get pretty good sleep. So, but getting outside in the morning, that's free.
Yeah.
Getting in a cold shower, fairly free.
Pretty free.
Paying for your water bill, but, not eating all the time.
Yeah.
Saving you money.
You know what? When I think about that too, when I think people go a restrictive, window, it's like, it's still 8 hours. It still is from the afternoon to the evening. And really the other thing besides that consciousness is people don't realize you've probably eliminated most snacking or weird fringe snacking, which is what I think really kicks our ass is that this sort of like, oh, that, and you just put it in your mouth. So these are practices that really it's just putting guardrails around and noticing. That's everything. What about your sleep? Did you change anything during this experience in your sleep? You do have to be somewhat social for a living.
That's the trickiest thing because sleep is so foundational. Obviously there's memory consolidation. There's this whole glymphatic system that happens when we sleep that cleans out all these dysfunctional proteins and beta amyloid plaques and all this stuff. But if you get a bad night's sleep, just by dint of your own experience of being alive, what a shithead you are. You know what I mean? It's like you don't eat well, harder to get a good workout. You're generally don't make great decisions. You're more, aggravated, etc. So it's key. And you're right. Like being social and being able to balance that with getting good sleep is very difficult. Because if I miss my little chronotype window, I have a hard time going to sleep. But, you do everything that you can to essentially ensure, good sleep architecture. Getting exercise and moving every day is sort of a non-negotiable for me in one way or another. Mm-hmm. I won't always be in the gym for 2 or 3 hours, but I have to take a walk, and generally taking a walk after dinner. So,
do you take it alone or do you take it with your bride?
I take it with Sky Mama most of the time. Yeah.
Is that a time? It's so interesting when you are in a partnership where it's also how do you create those space where you're not always talking about the kids, you're not talking about business. Yeah. Are you able to use that time to say, oh, this funny thing happened to me today, or we
usually space out a little. She's a avid podcast listener, with the exception of my podcast.
She knows that story already,
yeah, she knows that one. But she will often, keep me up to date on like current affairs and news. I follow news, but I'm not obsessed with news.
Good idea.
Because news is no longer new.
No.
Very soon.
I don't think so.
It's like it has a very short shelf life, and I'm really much more interested in the things that are timeless, because there's like I can't remember where I heard this little fable, but there was I remember someone like some creaky old gentleman in Vermont or whatever with a neighbor, and there was a massive snow, right? And, he's looking out his window, and the neighbor immediately gets out his snow shovel and is removing all the snow all day. And it's like his back is aching and just has this miserable time while this cranky old curmudgeon is sitting there smoking his pipe, reading the New York Times, sipping on scotch, whatever, wakes up the next morning, it's 60 degrees and all the snow has melted. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I think about that story and I'm like, why, I'm not going to get too triggered by what happens right today, because sometimes it actually resolves itself. Yeah. And where am I going to actually spend, this one little glorious blip of a life that I have? Am I going to worry and be anxious about it all the time? So, and I'm just actually more interested in things that are a little bit more timeless in nature. So, anyhow, I don't get too carried away with the news, but thanks to Skylar, I do kind of keep up on it on these walks.
You get chunks.
I get chunks.
Yeah.
And, but mostly it's just like, being outside and moving your body. And, it's obviously a great blood sugar regulator to walk or
right after you eat, of
right
course.
after you eat.
Yeah.
I try to, put that last little bite of protein bolus in my mouth. It's like a good 3 hours before I, lay my pretty head on my pillow. Just because, at that juncture I'll be more or less digested, so I can go to sleep in a not quite a fasted state, but at least a digested state. So that's a big one. And then all the other, sleep hygiene protocols. We don't have blackout curtains, but it's pretty dark.
Yeah.
My wife is sort of a draconian when it comes to energy consumption, so we don't ever use the heat or the air conditioning.
Oh, don't you get overheated in the summer ever?
Not really. We're sort of tucked down in the canyon a
Okay.
bit, and so the house remains cool. But at night, like I'll wake up and it's like 49 in the bedroom.
I mean, too cold is okay, but I think I sleep with a hot sleeper, and so Laird has chili pad because he wakes up because he overheats.
Right.
So, well, I mean, listen, if it were, you can just have a sheet. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, once you get under,
Yeah.
But it's like sometimes I'm like, I'm not gonna go pee because it's so
Oh, yeah,
cold.
no.
Oh
Yeah.
my god! And when I wake up in the morning, it's sometimes like a little tricky to get out of bed because I know the bedroom's so cold. But whatever, that's okay. That's like leaning into a little discomfort, right? And that's the whole idea. But yeah, there's other things like amber night lights, all amber light basically, and mostly amber light in the inferior field, because you're going to take that inferior light generally in the superior part of your retina, and you don't have those light sensitive neurons up there.
Right.
So this is actually some ophthalmologist is going to say I'm totally full of shit, but one of my hacks for like watching media at night is to actually put my laptop or something actually in the inferior field, like basically lower than me. So the light that's coming up is actually coming into more of the superior part of my retina, which is not sensitive to blue light. So that's just a little hack. Someone can tear that apart.
Sure.
But
They can email you, I'm sure.
Yeah, they can email.
Yeah.
We can argue about it very politely and compassionately. And obviously all like the night shift features on all of the gizmos. Sure. Yeah.
Is there something that do you worry? Do you
worry about death?
You do?
Sure.
Really?
That's my last great spiritual conquest.
Really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that. All right, what is it you mean? Because you have stuff you want to do. What is it that worries you?
Well, I think part of having consciousness, right, is this double-edged sword, right? It's like we get to be here with each other, really enjoy each other, really be all here and have this fulfilling conversation, and we can package up words as little vessels for emotions. We can share them with each other. We can learn from each other. This is like the wonderful, unique part of consciousness. There's an experience of what it's like to be Jeff and Gabby and Dinesh. So, and that's what we often call that qualia. Like, this is the wonderful side of consciousness. And then the kind of double-edged side is that we're in this strange moment as in the evolution of our species, that by some fortuitous combination of atoms in our brain, we know we're going to die. And I'm not sure any other animal knows that. Not only are we going to die, but everyone that we love is going to die. And this has created paroxysms of anxiety and fear throughout the history of Homo sapiens, right? So the fact that I'm a little bit freaked out about it, I don't take personally because I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Right. And I've really taken this as sort of the ultimate target of the self-examined or spiritual life is freedom from this fear of death. If we're going to live with a degree of real ease, part of that is being able to die with a degree of real ease. And, I got 3 girls like we've talked about, and probably like you, I read like voluminously to them growing up. You know, all the classics like the Chronicles of Narnia, The Witch of Blackbird Pond, Island of the Blue Dolphins, a lot of fairy tales. And in these fairy tales, there's sort of inevitably like a scullery maid that gets like 3 wishes, right? It's like, so I would read to my youngest one, Micah, and she challenged me one night as I was desperately trying to put her to sleep. Of course, this was when like her bedtime was actually before mine. Now that's flipped.
Yeah.
But she's like, Daddy, you know, if you had one wish, if you were a prince, you know, what would you wish for? And I would be like, I wish you'd fucking fall asleep. Right. But aside from that, like,
isn't there a book, Go the Fuck to Sleep, or something, right?
And she's like, don't give me that, Dad. I want a real wish. So then, you know, I was like, okay, well, you know, we got to think about it. You know, then a couple nights later, I was, you know, we were reading back to her again. She would like trap me in with her arm. She's a very small, little diminutive creature, but she had this like uncommonly heavy arm. She was like a parole officer. I was like, I'm trying to get on here. And I said, I got an answer for you now. And she's like, okay, Daddy, what's your big dream? And I said, well, I wish a long time from now, in the year 2088, when I'm 117, and you know your mother's an older woman, she'll be 118, and we'll be celebrating 100 years together at that juncture. And
or 99, or 99,
or 99,
depending on who you talk to.
You have a good memory. And it's not unfathomable. We've been together for 37 years, you know. She's like, oh, yeah, it's good. And I said, yeah, on that day, we're going to take a walk up to our little cabin. We're going to make this wonderful dinner and unpop this bottle of Chateau Margaux that I've been saving for 50 years and sip little thimbles of it. And then we're going to spoon up in bed, and your mom's going to read me that same New Yorker article about plate tectonics that she's read 50 fucking times. And she's going to hear my little parasympathetic slumber sleep breath, and she's going to hit the blast dolly on the light. And sometime in the middle of the night, I challenge her with science sometimes. The mitochondria in my cardiac cells and my neurons and the mitochondria in your mom's cells will produce one last plume of carbon dioxide up their little energy production chimneys, and your mom and I will die on the same day. And she was like, quiet. But she just knew that it wasn't the least bit morbid or morose. She just gave me a big hug. And I think that I mean, I know that sounds a little Pollyanna. But that, I think, is, you know, the quest that we're looking for is to live these like full, vital, vibrant lives. And then surrender to the fact that we are just these links in this kind of continuous chain of captured sunlight, and then give back everything that we've been extracted from this incredible experience. And I'm getting there with it. I can tell the story. I can cognitively get my mind around it. But can I really feel it? I don't know. The thing that I can sometimes equate it to is like, I can forgive people in my mind, but it takes me often quite a long time to forgive them in my heart. Can I have the freedom from the fear of death in my mind? I think so.
Yeah.
Can I deeply feel it? I'm getting there.
But maybe it just means that you're alive.
Yeah.
I think it's like a motor that makes a purring, humming noise. It probably does that when it's on. And I think even being able to say that it scares you is maybe almost the best we can do. I don't know. I look at it and go like, that's inevitable. I'm way more practical. And like, what am I going to do? Worry about that. I think living with somebody who does something dangerous,
Right.
you just sort of go, yeah, I'm okay. I don't know. I have people I love that I'd like to be around for. So I'll just do all the things I can so that I could walk up to my little abode at 117 on my own and still read and be with the person I love and just see what happens. So yeah, I really appreciate that. It's funny. I would have thought, I've never taken a psychedelic journey, and I was raised in the Caribbean. Everyone was kind of a little more wild. So I think I went real linear, and certainly Michael Pollan and all this work and discovery has opened my mind up. I microdose, here and there, but there has been that, I've read tons of books on how that sort of some of these journeys giving people to be at peace with the all, people in hospice care going on a journey being like, oh, I'm not afraid anymore.
Right.
But maybe we just have more work to do. Maybe we have to be here and...
Yeah, I mean, this is really the definition of the mystical experience. We trudge through life, generally associating our identity with kind of a locus of attention, crouching somewhere behind our eyes, right? Separate from the world around us, generally lugging around an increasingly saggy bag of skin, right? And to transform that experience of what it's like to be you to a sensation of being completely interwoven and interconnected with everyone and the universe. That is the mystical experience that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And this is why I think people every 40, 50 years become, there's a resurgence of psychedelics because our culture does not offer that to us. And if we sanctify sort of the captains of industry and the Marlboro men, the individual, right? So much in our society that we forget what we really, really are. There is no separating your function and behavior from the function and behavior of the environment. I've started to try to think of myself as like an environism or an organment or some sort of combination of the things.
Yeah.
And we know that like science elucidates that to us all the time. Like we don't make our own calories. We're heterotrophs. The plants are the autotrophs. And we eat the plants or we eat the animals that eat the plants, right? We exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen with plants. Like we don't make our own oxygen. We make carbon dioxide for them. They make oxygen for us. We are interwoven in that way. Of course, like the Buddha had this image that he called Indra's net. Is this notion that like the universe is this endless spider web, and at every juncture of that web, there's a crystalline diamond that reflects every other juncture. This is a beautiful, beautiful image, and sort of gave birth to his theories of interconnection and dependent origination and mutual arising and all of these kind of theories about what it's like to be alive that generally stem, from the East. And I agree. I think that if we can get a glimpse of that from time to time, of our true being, of this bigger, broader idea of being alive, that you are essentially the entire universe expressing itself in you here and now, that is liberation. I mean, that's nirvana, right? The embrace of interconnection and impermanence. But of course, it's a lifelong journey to get to that place. And I think that represents sort of our spiritual path.
Yeah. It also feels like I've started to look at it in the last 10 years like, oh, I have homework.
Yeah.
Clearly, I have homework, and that assignment, I think, is given to all of us. You talk about using good stress to go from surviving to opening up. And I think this is a really beautiful example of that. I know this is a strange question, but you've gotten better as you've gotten older. Let's say in the last 10 years, if I took a picture of you 10 years ago and now, one would say, wow, Jeff is. So we often equate being older with not being better. You're a great example of somebody, because we can do it emotionally and spiritually. We can definitely develop those, but a lot of times we don't realize we can even do that physically. So when I'm just curious, like you, Jeff, 200 plus pounds, looked in the mirror, and then today, how do you feel? Like, do you go like, how is that as an experience? Because I know you're not you're not a look at me guy or that kind of person, but it must be sort of interesting, like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not beyond some degree of vanity. I like the way I look versus the way I used to look, and other people do too, particularly my wife. But I think kind of the most sort of exhilarating part of it is knowing that change is possible.
Yeah.
Because we get mired in this vision of ourself, in we kind of our sense of self, I would say, is anchored often in this idea that there's something stable and fixed and reliable to what it is to be Jeff.
Yeah.
Largely because I wake up, I trudge into the bathroom, I look at myself in the mirror, I like suck in my gut and flex a little bit, and I'm like, there's Jeff. Looks more or less the same as he did yesterday. There's a sort of physical and psychological continuity to what it is like to be me that makes me feel like there's just a fixed Jeff. But of course, anytime we would look through a photo album or whatever, we know, like, am I that cherubic little kid? Am I that pimply adolescent? Am I like the distinguished denizen of middle age, what I am now? No, I'm like none of those things. I am process. I am process. I am changing moment to moment in relationship with my environment. And if you want to get sciencey about it, it's like I literally am 7 octillion atoms that were forged in the crucible of some supernova 8 billion years ago that over time has now self-assembled in me. And I'm having 37 billion chemical reactions every second. Every second. I am literally not the same person that sat down with you 90 minutes ago. And that is incredibly empowering because I think most people start to become the story they tell themselves about themselves. And in that story, change does not seem like something that is possible. And so now when I see myself, when I use my eyes, in that sense, that is the most exhilarating part of it, to know that I am just process. And at every moment, I am on this continuum and I can be moving towards wholeness. That is the process of healing. Or I can be moving towards disconnection. That is the process of ailing. And I have a good amount of agency over that trajectory.
This takes a lot of work to write a book and put it together and do the research the way you've done it. And I get the sense from you that you're the type of person that you're inspired to do the work, so you do it. But I can't help wonder, is there a hope in there? Like if someone reads this, if there's sort of something you wish for them.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of tell my story not because it's extraordinary, because unfortunately it's very ordinary. I woke up at 49, overweight, chronically fatigued, brain fogged, diabetic, with a gut as leaky as a rusty old pipe. But that didn't make me unique. That basically made me an average American. And I have now undergone a transformation, and that transformation is possible for you too. 100%. So this is what I hope that this book can accomplish in its tiny little small way, is to provide people with, a certain amount of prescription, but also with the agency and the empowerment that yes, you can transform your life.
Was it hard to heal the gut?
Yeah. I mean, because I was doing everything wrong for so long. So it was the reprogramming of a lot of bad habits. I mean, yeah. So, I mentioned I had a hip replacement.
Yeah.
So a lot of that was I had hip dysplasia as a kid, so I was predisposed to it. But then a lot of it was just like bone on bone grinding on the tennis court, the basketball court for years and years and years. And I was doing every single thing wrong.
Were you Advilling it and stuff?
I mean, so basically I would eat like an inflammatory diet all day. Then I would take 6 Advil, like lube myself up with icy hot, go out and play 2 hours of tennis, pop 2 more Advil, and then have like 3 beers. I mean, not smart. So all of those things were maybe providing me some temporary relief on my hip joint, but obviously absolutely destroying my gut.
Yeah.
The NSAIDs, and then of course I would get upset stomach, so then I would take PPIs on top of that, right? So all of those NSAIDs, PPIs, beer, cortisol, sugar, all culprits in creating dysbiosis and, by extension, intentional permeability, also known as leaky gut. Of course, I didn't know much about that at that time. I was like, a leaky gut doesn't sound great. I mean, I don't really know what that means, but it sounds like something I want to avoid. And then, of course, you learn about what's going on. And again, for me, and this is not true for everyone, some people are just like, tell me what the fuck to do, and I'll do it.
Yeah.
For me, I had to understand that there's these like tight little junctions in my epithelium and that, certain bacteria erode those junctures and those junctions, and these lipopolysaccharides degrade, and these bacteria get into my immune system, and that creates an inflammation, et cetera. So I had to actually kind of know what was going on for me to change my
You'll follow
behavior.
the rules if you understand the why.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's why I actually stress the importance of mechanism in a lot of ways, because if you understand the underlying mechanisms, then you can fiddle with the protocols to meet your bio-individual needs. If you don't really understand the underlying modes of action, something's not going to work. You might just give up on it. So for me, like getting into the nitty-gritty was important.
I know the gut for people, it always seems daunting and it's such an important part, but what they don't also understand is that literally almost immediately it can start healing. And that's what's so amazing. It can literally start to heal quickly. So I think it's both. It's understanding that.
Yeah, when we were crowding and sprouting, I wanted to make a course with Skylar called Krauts and Sprouts, but those were key. So we were sprouting at home. We really started sprouting all the time.
Yeah.
And it's so simple and so gratifying. Yeah. And then we were, fermenting a lot of different things, but particularly sauerkraut. And I was like supplementing with some high grade probiotics, and there's some that I like more than others. But I was more into like probiotics from food and a ton of fiber.
Yeah.
And fix it up, baby. Yeah.
So in wrapping this up, I would love to know, as a dad of 3 daughters, and each of them having distinctly different personalities, because we've had, chats, as my girls do, as well as people are. Is there something that has been, you've been a parent for a lot of years now, just a technique or a skill that you have developed that has really been a powerful tool for you as a parent? Because, everyone jokes, there's no manual, there's no book, and then you get the next kid and they're different, and then they're in a different phase. Is there been something that you've sort of developed for yourself that you think, oh, this is a tool I'm going to keep? It's been a powerful tool for me as a dad.
Yes, a number of them. I think the most important thing that you can do as a parent is simply create safety for your children. my eldest, Phoebe, had a conversation last fall, and she gave me what, in retrospect, was, I think, the greatest compliment I've ever had. So we used to have a nighttime ritual when we lived on the East Coast. We had a little cottage in Connecticut, and we lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. And we had a family rule that we would only drive at night because the 95, which was the interstate that we would take, was so clogged. There was just like a hairball on that interstate. So we would only drive at night. But once we got past New Haven in Connecticut, the highway got more serpentine and narrow, and all of the overhead lights went away. So it was very, very, very dark. And because she was the eldest, she would sit in the middle in the back seat, and she would look out the front window at night, and I would be always driving behind the wheel. And it was scary. You know, there was like winged little beasts smattering the windshield and all sorts of like decrepit roadkill on the side of the road. And I'd be going, and it would be narrow and it would be dark, and we'd be passing some wobbly 18-wheeler. And she was like, you know, Dad, on all of those trips that we took, the hundreds of trips, I would look out that front windshield into the frightening obsidian blackness of the night. And it was so scary. But then I would look at you driving behind the wheel, and I never once felt unsafe. And I know that she was making like a specific comment, but that's not really what she was saying.
Right.
She was saying, you've always kept me safe.
Yeah.
And that sounds like something that's so basic, but it's from safety that imagination and creativity emerge, that learning and growth is possible. Because if you don't feel safe, you're self-obsessed. The aperture of your attention is tiny. You don't trust the world. But for her, that feeling of safety just allowed her to be free and take risks. And, you know, as parents, like, we so often want our influence on our children to be like specific, right? It's like, meditate. I'm going to tell you and you're going to do it, right?
Yeah.
But it rarely works that way, you know? Of course, like I said, they almost never fail you to imitate you. And that's really the point. Like, leave footsteps in the sand for them to follow and keep them safe. Yeah. And if you can provide that for your children, and candidly for anyone in your life, that is, I think, a precious gift.
I think you do that for a lot of people.
Thanks.
I know why I like you so much. Only people I like can make me cry, by the way. Congratulations on everything you do, because the thing is, you know, you're not going to say this, but I can. Commune, Good Stress, Wanderlust, all these things have these threads that are put out there for people to help them if they want it in any way that they need it to elevate themselves. And I think, and again, you won't say it, but if you can build a life where you've combined all of these passions in your work and all of these things, I can't think of too many things better, you know, spending your time doing. So I really admire, I just really admire you a lot, Jeff, and congratulations on the book, and just remind people all the places that they can either send you mean emails or find curriculums on Commune or and then certainly, did you do Audible for Good Stress?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you did that.
With all sorts of bonus stuff in there and all that, yeah.
Okay.
They made me lead meditations. I'm like, oh, I have imposter syndrome. I'm not qualified. They're like, shut up, lead the meditations. I'm like, okay.
They've got a QR code you can scan and let's go.
That,
yeah, great.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love being with you. You make me feel really, really comfortable, and you really bring out the best in me. And I've seen that you do that with other people all the time. So thanks for inviting me here and inviting me into your home and making me wonderful coffee and making me feel comfortable. And you're just also always generous. And I think I found a kindred spirit, not just because we're the parents of 3 daughters, but we share a commonality. I somehow stumbled upon the URL of goodstress.com. So
are you serious?
Yeah.
This is where I like your other smart background, behind the scenes stuff. You have little secrets and surprises anyway.
Yeah, I mean, gettingwanderlust.com.
Good.
Ooh, man. I'm still sweating from that.
It's a great name.
And getting the trademark in every country. Holy moly. But yeah, goodstress.com. And you can go there. But really, I really want people to buy the book. And yeah, it is an expression of a lot of toil and love. So yes, if you're inclined to support me, please do. But I think what I'm most proud of is what we've built at Commune, because that's really where kind of we platform people, and all of the little tiny shards of wisdom that I've been able to accrue are really a distillation of that. So if you go to onecommune.com, which is ONE commune.com, you will find the treasure trove of
so much
luminaries and teachers, including Gabby, Reece, and candidly, all the people that have most influenced me in my life. And then, I wax alternately poetic and pathetic on Instagram, kind of because I have to, at Jeff Krasno. And I enjoy it. I've surrendered to it. So those are the main locales.
Great. Jeff Krasno, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks everyone for spending some time with me. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you did, feel free to share it with your friends, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, I want to hear from you. Tell me what's working, what's resonating with you, and how you're getting it done. Keep going.